Paul Valéry and words. I don't believe in words. They are empty baskets, wandering syllables, masks of fragile deceptions, light puffs of present improbability, adverbs of nonsense, cerulean wind that time consumes, cancels, erases. They are graceful leaves, flights of uselessness, blades that cut, punish, indelible signs that dissolve on the carpet of life. We bend them to the disenchantment of poetry, tercets and rhymes, sculptures of fragile air that devour without mercy. They have no roots. They do not know how to flourish. They are trembling shadows, changing mirrors in a world that bends and breaks them. Yet we are seduced by black lines of ants along the consecutio temporum, an illusion of order in chaos. Perhaps in silence words rest, seals of promises never kept, atavistic weights, broken flights of ancient unspoken dreams. Antonio Ferragamo, 2025, unpublished poem. The words of ordinary language, that is, the language we use in everyday life, are characterized by their imperfections and unreliability. Unlike the words of technical languages, such as mathematics and physics, the words of ordinary language are imprecise, approximate, and ambiguous. We are not at all surprised by the disenchanted and bitter distrust that the poet Antonio Ferragamo expresses toward them. How can we not blame them, in fact, for the betrayals they perpetrate and for the dishonest ends to which they lend themselves? How can we not criticize them for the falsehoods they transmit? How can we not recognize the uselessness that so often characterizes them? How can we not distrust these changing mirrors for their innate propensity for semantic adultery, for giving themselves to the highest bidder, for the most shameless, sinister, and reprehensible opportunism? And again, how can we not fear them for the incurable wounds they inflict, for the irreparable harm they cause, for the indelible shame they cast? The words of ordinary language can be weapons, blades that cut, but they can also heal us, console us, caress us, make us smile. They can slow us down, inhibit us, but they can also incite us, spur us on, encourage us. They can overflow with meaning, but they can also be empty baskets. And yet, despite all these imperfections, despite their intrinsic ambiguity and unreliability, despite our full awareness of all this, they seduce us. They seduce us with the order they seem to impose on chaos, with the illusions they promise, with their grace and lightness. Among the professionals of the word, those who have made words their instrument and field of work, the French writer Paul Valéry, 1871 to 1945, was certainly one of the most skeptical about their use in ordinary language. A poet, essayist and philosopher, and a member of the Académie Française, Paul Valéry investigated for more than 50 years the nature of thought, its mechanisms, its possibilities, and its limits. He entrusted most of his reflections, spanning literature, philosophy, psychology, linguistics, religion, and mathematics, to his Cahiers, a monumental work of more than 26,000 pages that he composed daily from 1894 to 1945. According to Valéry, language in its most general sense and in all its forms is the privileged instrument for expressing thought. In the Cahiers, Valéry states very clearly that thought without language is nothing. Thinking and expressing one's thoughts are difficult to discern. There is no clear separation. Between thinking and expressing one's thoughts, there is only a nuance of language. Language is the universe of thought. Language is the privileged instrument for expressing thought, first, because it gives life to the mind, which is the main seat of thought. Valéry says, language has made almost everything, and among other things, it has made the mind. Language is in fact an instrument of the mind regarding the mind. It gives the mind the means to make itself present to itself and to operate on itself. This reflective operation, which the mind carries out on itself, begins in early childhood and is concretized in thought. The infant plays with language as with his limbs. He speaks to himself, and this is the beginning of thought. Thinking, therefore, is communicating with oneself. Valéry compares the mind's operation through language to an act of self-palpation. Thanks to the whispered words heard internally, I explore my thoughts, my possessions, my possibilities. I travel through myself word by word, and without them, nothing would be clear internally. They are thousands of probes involved in billions of experiences. like the nervous system of a nervous system. Through this operation, language makes the individual a thinking being who tends to live more in the expression of things than in things themselves. Second, language is the privileged instrument for expressing thought because it gives thought a specific form. Valéry says that organized thought exists only through language. It consists of a perpetual exchange between thing, idea of thing, and synact. In fact, pure, inarticulate thought, without an instrument like language to give it form, would remain what it is, a useless, terrible, stupid circular dream, an infinite series with no value in itself. When language is annulled, one is frightened, humiliated, annulled, since immediately all civilization and the world are annulled, and nothing remains except the formless, that which resembles nothing. Finally, language allows us to transcend the immediate contingent sensory data, to go beyond the limits of the here and now, to return to the past or to direct ourselves toward the future. Only language allows man to escape being limited to the perception of present objects and the immediate reactions they provoke. Despite its usefulness as a means of expressing thought, ordinary language, when used in its daily, non-technical form, unlike mathematics, physics, and other sciences, proves for Valéry to be an unreliable instrument. Ordinary language forces thought, and with it all of reality, into ambiguous and imprecise representative cages, true, descriptive, and interpretive, traps that can only give us back, in a distorted and falsified way, a minimal part of what they represent. Valéry says, "What makes almost everything obscure is language, because it forces us to fix and generalize without our wanting to." There are various ways in which ordinary language exercises its distorting power. Here are some of the examples Valéry offers. Language establishes a beginning and an end where none exists in reality. The problem of language consists in representing a relatively continuous series with sets of finite elements, and vice versa. Language imposes subordinations and dependencies that do not exist in the actual nature of things. For example, the necessary link between subject and complement, usually valid in an absolute sense when the subject is animate, extends falsely to inanimate things, leading to misrepresentation. The verb to think creates its own subject, even when the subject is not truly capable of thought, e.g. the thing thinks, the matter thinks. These propositions become absurd when we question whether the subjects of to think are not merely placeholders deduced from the need to use the verb. Language diminishes or cancels our ability to perceive the field of possible transformations. It imposes itself, replaces things, and falsely equates things that are fundamentally different. There is no inherent opposition between pleasure and pain, yet language frames them as contrasts, like black and white, day and night, salt and pepper, good and evil. But who knows if the opposition of good and evil is not pure rhetoric? If one says life is death, this little word imposes symmetry, equivalence in a first moment, and then contrast, opposition, incompatibility in a second moment, derived from the substantivized form given to these ideas. Yet life and death are not opposing figures that can be composed in a monument. They are things of which one is a modification of the other, each needing the other. A whole metaphysical rhetoric has been generated by such notation, day and night, good and evil, all of which departs from observation and abuses the freedom of noun-copular attribute constructions. This simple consideration of language reveals its pitfalls and its tendency to distance the mind from things, drawing it into the play of formal combinations. There are connections we make only thanks to language. Through signs, we link objects of knowledge that would otherwise have no relationship. Language's particular mode of transmission, through additive signals, means that the thing received or produced has no rational connection to the thing that emits it. Ordinary language, therefore, allows thought to be expressed, but under the specific conditions it imposes. These conditions imprint upon thought the pre-established forms of ordinary language, with several important consequences. 1. As Valéry's examples show, ordinary language causes an irremediable alteration of thought itself. 2. Ordinary language diverts and misleads our thoughts. Valéry says, the presence of words and forms of a language already given, learned since childhood, and with which we have contracted such an immediate intimacy that we can no longer distinguish it from our organized thought, limits our mental creativity from the moment it is in embryo. It shapes thought more than it expresses it, and even orients its development in a direction different from the initial one. Language transforms my point of view. Finally, ordinary language allows us to give life and expression to the unthinkable, to what cannot even be conceived. Indeterminate words like God, universe, infinity, cause, spirit, soul. Note how irrational language has taken root in this strange property, allowing us to say what cannot even be conceived. Here, then, is the great deception of ordinary language. Everything happens, in the vast majority of cases, as if ordinary language were an exact representation of our consciousness and knowledge. We believe in problems, implications, and real relations that exist only in its pre-established forms and ways. Unfortunately, ordinary language does not coincide at all with the real means of our thought. It neither divides nor composes thought with precision. This is why the sciences create their own languages, always referring to observations and sensible operations that can be described precisely by common language. Where does the unreliable precision and approximation of ordinary language come from? In a moment of discouragement, Valéry laconically notes, language has never seen thought. But elsewhere, he offers a historical explanation. The imprecision of ordinary language derives from its chaotic formation over centuries, a disorderly succession of individual, casual contributions, uncoordinated by any common project or purpose, shaped only by accidental and momentary individual needs. Valéry says, language is a mixture, a very impure complex of different methods. That word was born from a certain point of view in the 10th century, another is wild. The same applies to form and syntax. Words have been forged or put into circulation by unspecified individuals, in particular circumstances, altered by rhetorical accidents, often without regard for previous usage. The system of words in a language is always irregular, having developed haphazardly, without perspective or non-contingent purpose. It is no surprise, then, that these systems are incomplete, with overloads, gaps, mutual overflows of meaning, and non-uniform subdivisions of knowledge. Certain oppositions and symmetries are missing. Often, one is tempted to look for a difference between two terms that seem interchangeable, almost synonymous, and one ends up inventing rather than discovering this difference. Usage then adopts the invented solution. But it is overlooked that language is made of creations from different eras, independent of one another, and that no single well-distributed functions or built vocabulary in an orderly, methodical way. Thus, two words may have been introduced separately, each in its own context, and the idea of a difference between them is an illusion of someone who assumes they were formed simultaneously and systematically. In reality, there is no more difference between these words than between two things never meant to meet. These reflections lead Valéry to several conclusions. 1. The statistical nature of ordinary language. Language is a statistical set. Laws are only observations. A syntax rule is only a probability. This insight is confirmed by modern AI systems, which use ordinary language based on word sequence probabilities. 2. Language inoculates society into thought. The use of ordinary language inevitably introduces into our thinking the mass of otherness, unknown or known. That language has forged through its trades, expediencies, intrigues, superficialities, lies, and needs to obtain, seduce, or intimidate. You awaken, O my thought, completely performed by who knows whom, and in my heart I find only others. 3. Language shapes the self. Our personality is molded by language, which is inseparable from society, from groping relationships, factual exchanges, and mimic contagions among similar and dissimilar people. I do not know what my thinking would have been if raised in China, educated in Chinese. What remains of me after this training? What does it deny me the tools to respond to? What does it make me respond to without my even suspecting another way? Like the neo-positivists of the Vienna Circle, Valéry felt the need to construct a pure language, free from imprecision. He envisioned an artificial, pure language, analogous to Cartesian geometry in relation to Greek geometry. Literature, he argued, has always engaged in this exercise. Ordinary language is constitutionally impure, Refined literature attempts to construct, almost unknowingly, a general pure language, just as the sciences construct their particular pure languages. Pure here means preceded by explicit conventions and constructed according to a defined point of view. Valéry's reflections on the flaws of ordinary language, its imprecision, unreliability, and ambiguity, stand in stark contrast to its evident utility in daily life. Despite its limitations, ordinary language enables social life, practical affairs, and cross-linguistic understanding. Valéry does not deny this utility, provided we do not attribute to ordinary language properties it does not possess. Valéry says, "It is fine. It serves its function when taken or left as needed, like a tool, pliers, an auger, or a monetary instrument, sometimes like a weapon, but never like an oracle, as if it knew more than we do." However, we must not misunderstand Valéry. His warning is against the temptation, fueled by our mind's automatisms, to delegate to ordinary language the functions proper to thought itself, especially the capacity for self-observation and investigation of its own conditions. The boundary is crossed when ordinary language replaces thought entirely. We generally think in language, and it takes effort to notice this, to avoid reducing all mental development to mere linguistic expressions, to combinations bound by language's pre-existing rules. Sometimes we conclude that thinking is nothing more than talking to oneself in a certain way. At that moment, ordinary language imposes its illusions, making them seem like extensions of our thought. Common language inserts between our singularity and its knowledge an expression of strange statistical origin, inexact, imposing illusions about the scope of what we think and produce. Hence the need and the difficulty of developing a metalanguage to study the interior language of thought. Valéry asks, what is real interior language made of? It seems known, yet it is not at all. Here we touch the untranslatable. We must stop and find something that understands itself. What is ordinarily called thought is still only a language, a very particular one, whose axioms differ greatly from those of ordinary language. But where does translation begin? And what is translated? Valéry spent his life attempting to elaborate this metalanguage. In my dictionary, I have spent my life making my own definitions. Others have followed in this endeavor. However, any such attempt must begin with ordinary language, just as technical and scientific languages do. We start with ambiguous, uncertain terms, then define them. Univocally within a reference theory, as with force in physics, new terms may be coined, but their meaning derives from the theory and prior definitions. Ordinary language also offers another advantage, one Valéry may not fully embrace, its reciprocal integration with thought. Thought and language are not perfectly superimposable. Experiments show that thought can exist without language. Globally aphasic individuals, unable to produce or understand ordinary language, can still solve algebraic and logical problems and infer others' beliefs. Neurophysiology shows that geometric and proto-musical language do not engage the brain regions used for ordinary language. We often have something in mind but struggle to express it, proof that thought and language are not identical. Conversely, language can clarify thought. As E.M. Forster wrote in Aspects of the Novel, 1927, "How can I know what I think until I see what I say?" Because they are not identical, thought and language, when well governed, can compensate for each other's shortcomings, offering support and developmental possibilities neither could achieve.